Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Whispers of the Deep. My name is Draken. Today we're going over Chapter 12, Lucian 3. So, Lucian 3 is continuing in the Erdonia plotline, but rather is the end of the Erdonia plotline, where previously we had Lucian, Fortuna, and Iril all sharing POVs in the same geographic area, and then with these POV chapters happening within hours of each other, now we have Lucian leaving Erdonia and the divergence of these plot lines. Now, from this point on, with the plot lines happening in different places, there's also going to be a dilation of time. Namely, Lucian's chapter takes place over the course of 3 days. So, to give a brief rundown of what happens, Lucian essentially leaves Castle Ravencroft with Edmund, Egenhand, and three of Lucian's guard. They go across Erdonia and then eventually settle in Flaughton on the Crossings to reunite with the rest of Edmund's retinue. And then along the ways, we have a couple conversations. We have a conversation between Lucien and Egenhand, Lucien and Edmund, and then also a brief encounter between Lucien and Irol. This chapter deals a lot with Lucien's mental state, as well as what Lucien anticipates is going to happen in this new chapter in his life, so to speak. There's a lot going on, and let's go through it, beginning always with the epigraph. So this epigraph comes from a previous author, Otis the Traveler, specifically his geographies, and this chapter basically this epigraph frames this entire chapter as a discussion of ruins, things in the past, and namely we have this thing about the ancients and how they have left scars of stone upon the land, ruins that we in fact see and are mentioned further in the chapter, and that these ruins are the home of pigeons, which have either settled in these places on their own or put in these places by the people who originally built these ruins, and that these pigeons cannot be gotten out. While this could be simply seen as a stated fact of geography, on a more allegorical level, these pigeons are people, and the ruins are the structures of the past that have been built by previous generations. And speaking of the past, we hear a lot about Lucian's mental state and a thing that has been bothering him, which was alluded to in the previous Fortuna chapter. So, although he went with five others, for Lucian the path was lonely. That basically says that is pretty much this chapter. Lucian feels on his own. He feels as if he is unsure of basically himself, his future, all those sorts of things. And we have him riding a chestnut mare, which mirrors Iril's brown horse, his pale brown horse entering Erdonia in Ira 1. So his mind is elsewhere in the morning, which would be the morning he left, in the past, in the eyes of the man as he had pled for mercy. So in this chapter, we learn about Caithness, where in the Fortuna 3 chapter, we learn about a man Lucian had sentenced to death and beheaded. This man was Caithness, and Lucian is haunted by the spirit of Caithness, more or less. Lucian reminds himself of the name, with the name signifying the soul, essentially, that his name was Caithness and his widow was Maria. The fact that it says was is meant to be ambiguous whether or not Maria is dead or simply his widow when he was the person who succeeded him, his widow was named Maria, in the same way that his name was Caithness. Now, so Caithness is a bit of a play on words with Caithness or Cathenes in ancient Greek, basically translating to someone or anyone, that this person is explicitly nameless. It could be anyone. And the fact that it is a person rather than any person in particular is the thing that matters to Lucian. And then goes back and sees one of the three household guards and Counselor Egenhand, who had decided to join them. We learn later that this household guard is Julianus, which might relate to something in Lucian 1, but that's neither here nor there. Now, Lucian remembers when he, earlier that day, basically approached Egenhand with a conspiracy theory. And the conspiracy theory, we'll get to that, is essentially somewhere on the castle whisper yesterday was more than a simple hunting accident. An arrow, yes, but meant for what? Or should I say who? Essentially, that the arrow that struck Iroh was shot intentionally. And Lucian is admitting that this rumor is Brother Preston and Fortuna's rumor. However, before that, Egenhand says in this very cryptic way, their needs are elsewhere, unclear who they are. Is this Tigran Otho? Is this Egenhand? Is this Iroh's needs? But basically, what has happened is that with Egenhand leaving with Lucien and Edmund and the rest, it seems he is no longer decided to recruit Iroh, that that door has been closed, and that is of some consolation to that is some consolation to Lucien and to Fortuna that if Iroh's staying because if Egan's leaving, that means Iroh's staying. And if Iroh's staying, that means he can be in charge of Castle Ravencroft and Fortuna and Kanta doesn't need to be, which is um a relief in Fortuna's mind and also in Lucian's mind to some extent, albeit a lesser extent. However, when Lucien approaches Egenhand and says and that the arrow was intentionally shot, albeit we don't know for whom, this essentially means one of several things. One, Lucien is obviously implying that Egenhand shot the arrow, but then the question is who are the people he shot it at? Either he shot at Edmund, which is a conspiracy theory that Preston poses, or he shot it, or he meant to shoot at Lucien. Now, Lucien would be very brazen as to talk to someone who he'd be suggesting is his own assassin. So realistically, he's saying that you intended to kill the prince. Of course, knowing looking back at Fortuna 3, we know this doesn't really have much legs to stand on, because if Egenhand wanted to kill Lucien, why would he concoct a hunting accident when he could have just murdered him on the way to Castle Ravencroft? It doesn't make sense. And of course, Egenhand is aware of all of this. Egenhand says, it would behoove our Lord and ruler to remember he too was on the hunt yesterday, implying that yes, well, you say the arrow was intentionally shot. Well, then I could have been intentionally shot at you. However, this is a bit of wordplay, as Egenhand is wont to do. But to say that the arrow that to say that Lucien was also on the hunt means that Lucien is also possibly the one who shot the arrow. And of course, we know that Lucien, in truth, blames himself. He doesn't think he shot the arrow. He doesn't know for sure, but it might as well have been him. We know that from Fortuna 3. So the arrow could have been his, as we just implied. Now, before you pontificate words that would be treasonous to some, which would be that you, Egenhand, were trying to shoot the prince, that's the treasonous word, I suggest you move aside, with, of course, the threat being then I'll say you were trying to shoot the prince. Is 3 days to fall on the crossings, and every remained far from fair Calais is one where a prince goes unfulfilled. This is a bit more of wordplay, where the prince is Edmund, however, it is a bit obscure about who exactly Egenhand is talking about. Lucien backs off and then says, you know what Edmund, asked me, and like, this is a dumb question that Lucian's asking because, of course, Egenhand knows what Edmund asked. They've had the better part of they've had over a month to discuss it. Of course, Edmund has told Egenhand that he intended on recruiting Lucien, especially when Egenhand and Edmund leave the capital Fair Calais because Tychon Otho's we'll get to that. Well, you've already read the chapter, so I'll tell you now. Because Tychon Otho's first son, Uther, is dead, so obviously he's discussed it. So, to continue, Lucien isn't speaking more until Kelon's daughter Sepia. This is if Kelon is the god of war and the god of the sun, Sepia is his daughter, who's the goddess of like dawn. And we have the evocation of Dawn's rosy fingers in Iroh 2, if I remember correctly. But here we have the rosy light of Sepia, who is riding Kelon's sun chariot in the same way that, say, Phaethon fails to ride Helios's sun chariot. Then Lucien looks with the dawn, looks up and thinks of Iroh. So Lucien then basically goes back to Iroh's bedchamber to get one last look at him. And the idea of having one last look before leaving, this could evoke the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, but this also could just be Lucien being sentimental, which Lucien is nothing if not sentimental, albeit not quite as sentimental as Iroh. So he says, one final look, that's all, if indeed the gods keep us apart till we reunite in Dios Twilight Halls. Dios Twilight Halls has been evoked a couple times so far, but is essentially the underworld, Dios being the god of the dead. In fact, the theme of death and where people, when they're dead, go is a recurring motif in this chapter. That they would reunite either in Dios Twilight Halls in spirit or below in the Undercroft in their actual cremated remains and their funeral masks, as Iroh shows in Iroh 1. Now, a small part of him whispered, should it still stand, with the threat that somehow Castle Ravencroft will get destroyed. So, this is again a reminder that while many characters suggest that Iroh has like a black beast or a black bird on his shoulder, Lucian is the actual person who has a voice whispering inside his head dark thoughts and dark feelings. So here we have the actual spelling it out that Egenhand leaving means Iroh staying, and Iroh staying means he's allowed to take command of the mandate, which means that Kanta doesn't need to. So Lucian finds Iroh asleep, but Lucian expects to find Iroh asleep, but he doesn't. Instead, Iroh is clutching a parchment, and the parchment has all the love Lucian had ought to give. Essentially, it was some kind of well-wishing message, which we will see at a future date. But Iroh is awake, and Lucian imagines the tears on Iroh's face, that the left eye has tears coming out of it, and the right eye has blood coming out of it, because Iroh has actually lost his right eye, and assumedly the wound would have reopened or some kind. But Lucian is imagining all of this. This isn't real. Bleary-eyed, Iroh turned towards the doorway, so he is crying, but not the tears and blood specifically. But Lucian saw in it being either Iroh being depersonalized or Iroh's face. No recognition that Lucian, I, Iroh, in Lucian's mind, does not recognize Lucian. And this could be for one of many reasons. And then Lucian runs away, runs down the stairs, knowing that if he had stayed, he might have been convinced to not go to Fair Calais, or that it would have delayed him for some amount of time. Lucian, of course, is obsessed with duty and obligation and the justice of doing what one had ought to do, and also of like preserving the material conditions of people. But here, this is more the deontic side of justice. Of justice is doing one's munus, one's duty in the social order. And Lucian has been called upon by his lifelong friend and by the prince to do something. So the justice of the system would be for him to obey. Lucian, of course, is nearly to tears at this thought and says, I should have stayed if only for a word or two. But that part of him whispers that you fear what he would have replied, which is the fear that Iroh, as alluded to in Fortuna 3, has gone mad, and that Iroh would not recognize Lucian, which is seemingly what happened, and that Iroh is essentially like completely lost his mind. And then this also ties into the things that Iroh or whatever had been possessing Iroh said with the names Sammy and Castor, that Lucian, being a student of history, knows of a Castor, but thinks of Castor the Open-Handed, who was one of the Murulai in a previous generation some 500 years ago. And then Sammy, though he cannot place the name Sammy, it seems to be a less common name, but not one that he can think of. To lose an eye is one thing, but a mind that spells it out. And then Lucian has adopted Iroh's nervous tick of clutching the necklace. This necklace is made of glass, by the way. It is red, though, and not black, and does not have an eye shape on it, duly note. But anyways, Lucian's fingers found on the glassy amulet, the same he had stolen Olin. So Lucian is adopting Iroh's perspectives. He is adopting Iroh's mannerisms, and the fact that this little spherical apricot-sized amulet is with Lucian and not Iroh is something which is being drawn attention to. So to continue, um, Lucian also poses the idea that perhaps Iroh's delirium was caused by Brother Preston's herbs, namely the valerian root and the hyoscyamus. So he says, surely you, talking to the amulet, are the cause of such madness. And we established in Fortuna 3 that that doesn't seem likely, but it's something that's nevertheless on Lucian's mind. He's clearly going in circles and doesn't really know what to make of things. And then we have this thing about Lucian wondering if he could send a raptor bearing his voice, because raptors do essentially a parroting or mimicking of voices in order to communicate information, that he'd send one to Fair Calais, so when they got there some month or so later, he would have some research about the amulets, even though he's realistically supposed to be working for Edmund. Of course, he doesn't. Lucian either falls asleep or loses time, and then Julian is at his door telling them it's almost dawn and it's time to get going. And then apparently Lucien had been nodding off a little bit, and Edmund now talks to him. And Lucien says rough night because he did not get much sleep. And this is what spirit kept you, essentially. What spirit or supernatural entity kept you awake? And he says Thamus's daughter Clarata. So Clarata comes from the Latin claros, which means clear or like known. And essentially Clarata is the goddess of secrets in the way that Thamus, her father, is the god of knowledge, but also like the sea, and also like time. So things that are sort of linked of this vast pool of knowledge. And he repeats the conspiracy theory to Edmund that the arrow which found my brother was instead meant for you. And Edmund doesn't buy this because rather than why would Egenhand have not done already, why would Egenhand bother in the first place? Because he trusts him. Of course, this is strange because Edmund calls Egenhand scrupulous character, but that's the wrong word. Scrupulous means someone who is incredibly diligent, not in someone who's incredibly trustful. So someone who's incredibly trustworthy. So is Edmund making a small linguistic tick or error, or is this he is associating the idea of someone doing their job well with someone being able to be relied on, where those things are connected, but not exactly in the way it should be. If you tr a say Egenhand actually was an assassin or someone put on a job to kill Edmund, the fact that he'd be scrupulous means that he would do the job effectively, that he could be relied on by the contractor, not not by the person he's meant to kill. So it's a bit questionable. And he says, if you want to be dead, I would be well familiar with the wine and water of Dios Twilight Halls, which is, well, what we said previously. And then Edmund calls over Egenhand to talk about the story behind his hand. And this basically keys us into the fact, yeah, no, Egenhand's obviously a fake name. Egenhand, Ebon Hand, Black Hand for the black silk glove he wears on his left hand. Obviously, obviously, Egenhand is a pseudonym. Like, obviously. And here, the story finally showing this, putting this in our attention is really saying, yeah, no, he's obviously under a fake name. What you think fathers and mothers are naming their children Egenhand? It's obviously a fake name with everything that's going on. In fact, Egenhand says this incredibly complicated thing about the glove. It is metaphor stacked on top of metaphor stacked on top of metaphor. So, the glove is a reminder of who Egenhand is that, like stones beneath the pool, when the glove changes, the man beneath remains constant. So the glove is a reminder of Egenhand's origin, that while the glove changes, the person beneath stays the same, in the same way that in a pool, like a spring or a pool, the stones at the bottom of the pool stay the same, but the water flowing over it changes constantly. And then Egenhand relates this to an idea of one's homeland and better thing to die than leave a homeland, which is a quote from something. Um, Second, Egenhand says the glove is a glove, which is a glove protects, it conceals, and it deadens the hand, no matter how thin. So the glove, while it is a reminder, is also something which has a sort of manipulative ability on reality and the nature of the hand beneath it. So Egenhand is saying that simultaneously, the hand beneath the glove does change, but also the hand beneath the glove does not change. And Lucien is skeptical of this. He's like, do you believe that? Do you believe the hand doesn't change, even though you say the hand does change? And then Egenhand then says, the people will repeat whatever lets them rest and keep their eyes closed. Again, showing that Egenhand does not care much about the truth. Like a glove, ours is to guard their hands, lest they scratch them in their own ignorance. This is the third thing. The glove is not just a reminder of how Egenhand has changed and how Egenhand has not changed. The glove is a symbol of Egenhand's duties, which is that a glove protects the hand. So in this metaphor, Egenhand is the hand and he is the glove, but in different metaphors stacked on top of one another. And then finally, the glove is a metaphor not only for Egenhand's origin, how Egenhand has changed over time and Egenhand's job is also a metaphor for the implication of Egenhand's job, which is a glove deadens the hand. The hand becomes accustomed to the glove, and that the glove protects the hand from scratching itself. The nature of the glove existing makes says that the glove or whoever put the glove on believes the hand cannot be trusted to govern its own affairs, that the glove is necessary, at least the hand not scratch itself. So this is a rather oligarchic way of thinking that if Egenhand is like a counselor, a high member of the Red Gold, and a magistrate of the Empire Noria, the people of the Empire are the hand, and he is the glove. And he's saying that the people do not know how to govern themselves, they would scratch themselves in their own ignorance. We are the glove which protects them, yet the glove that deadens them, and the people eventually become accustomed to wearing the glove itself, which is essentially saying the people become accustomed to being ruled. So many, many metaphors stacked on top of one another. And then this, though, gets turned into a discussion of justice, where Lucien remembered Cathany's face, red from tears and the scratches his sister had left before meeting her end. This is something we learn more about. So now we got the picture of not only did Cathany's murder someone, he murdered his sister, and Lucien killed him for that. We don't know what the crime was, though. Um, and there's also something about Maria with chickens, but we'll get to that. So I can anchor silent for a time. After that, we have by whose command? Who appointed us their shepherd? Who appointed us the glove to the people? And Egenhand says God and the laws of our ancestors. The laws of our ancestors being similar to the Latin phrase of the mos maiorum, the customs of our ancestors. So Egenhand is essentially appealing to tradition, to traditional authority structures, and to God, saying, why can the common people not be trusted to govern themselves? Because God said so, or the God said so, and because the laws of our ancestors say so. Why else would you go against both the Temple of the Triarchy, representing the divine, and the Hall of Origin, representing the laws of the ancestors? And this is like essentially Egenhand is giving the argument of the status quo of the system, that the system is there to protect the common people because the common people cannot be trusted to protect themselves, and Lucien doesn't really buy it because, well, when Lucien thought he knew better than the common people, he ended up killing Cathanes, and Lucien is clearly someone who is being haunted by that. So Lucien realized that he's been put in a bit of a snare, and he thinks of the rolling hills, the lines of pillars coming, going nowhere, the cliffs inlaid with old engravings that surrounded them for miles. So these are symbols of this antiquity, of these laws of our ancestors, but these, more literally speaking, are places where bandits could hide. These are places where people who wished who could be listening in, or people who would wish Lucien poorly would be. And he says, the temple and Origins Hall are two of the pillars which our empire stands, which goes without saying. Even so, while the line of the grips says the divine is without blemish, essentially that the line of the grips, the holy text, believes in a perfect God, how its emanations. So this tells us about the religion, that essentially the line on the grips poses a henotheistic religion. I believe this is addressed somewhere in a previous chapter, but essentially there's the overgod, and then there are lesser gods, which are emanations of those gods, and then it goes down and down. So while the ultimate God, the ideal form, is without blemish, the emanations are blemished, and this is a very Platonic philosophy, a very Platonic religious structure, and it's essentially because the laws are imperfectly derived from the divine. There are errors and there can be injustice. When flawed justice inevitably arises, there are two paths: correct the man, correct the law. Essentially, correct whoever is the practitioner of the law, or correct the laws itself, because both are flawed. Either way, the error is fixed and a stronger Nori created. And Egenhand counters with with one of the paradoxes of evil, that correcting the justice or law often requires neither, that oftentimes inside of corrupt systems, extrajudicial means must be used in order to fix things. However, then, if you use evil or use injustice to correct injustice, injustice or evil persists, albeit in a different form. So how do you deal with that? And he says you are speaking as one digging old earth, which is someone digging carefully. Perchance you were to exhume some chthonic woe. We will hear more about this in time, but this essentially is this idea that old things are dug up, and this would leave Erdonia a waste. Now, wastes are essentially these ecological dead zones in the world that we will hear about more later, but essentially there's this fear of digging up old Earth because you don't know what you could find. And what chthonic woe is exactly, well, Cathonos is something that comes from the earth, something coming from the deep earth. So what kind of woes come from the deep earth? That is something to be said. And then we get to New Nerkayum, which is built around a shattered spire in the center of Erdonia. And here we learn finally about what the spires are. Essentially, spires are these giant mountain-like structures which look like whittled or perhaps blasted, um, but mainly whittled monolithic pillars of stone in these jagged peaks. And no one has any idea what made them. Lucien thinks they look whittled, but who would whittle down an entire mountain? And then Brother Preston says that essentially, so there are all these like ruins of unmortared Cyclopean stone around the world, but it's a distinct architectural design from the spires itself. So that could lend credence to the idea that the spires were built by the gods, but honestly, no one knows who built the spires. And then there's a lot more to it than that. These spires that are around the world, we don't know who built them, but some of them, when people found them, already had rooms carved out of them because you turn the spires into castles, essentially, or you turn them into or you turn them into palaces. So one, and these spires are all over the world. One, you find spires that already have rooms carved out of them. Two, you need to carve the rooms themselves. Three, the spires are impervious to harm and cannot be carved. So it seems these spires are made unequally, and there are different types of them. And New Nerkayum's spire had been shattered with the top fallen off, and that top had been quarried to build the city itself. And Edmund talked about this. Princess, how torn your gown has become, how thorns scraped your shoulders. This is a deeply explicit metaphor, shall we say, that a torn gown has specific connotations of specific types of violence, as do thorns scrape shoulders, with the idea of running through a forest. So Edmund is being incredibly crass here, as he is wont to do, but he's also just talking about the destruction of a city with the exact syntax of this sequence. Princess, how blank be your blank, the blank blank. This is a echoing of the opening of the biblical book of Lamentations, which describes the destruction of Jerusalem after the Babylonian captivity. And Lucian then has an image again of Cathany's, of the sister Cathany's slain, the gouges on her belly, her groin, and her breasts, suggesting some kind of sexual offense again. Now, with the chickens Maria had tried to use to ransom her husband's life, and these chickens being silenced, and Cathany's and the beheading, and whatever he did to his sister, and whatever crime his sister had done to warrant all this, there's a lot going on there. And well, that would be telling if I said exactly what it was, but we'll get there. So Edmund says, "You've heard the story," and so we get the story of Jace Adon. Jace Adon, Jace Adon, what error did you do? You carved New Nerkayum, but your son carved you. It's a nice little nursery rhyme type thing. But essentially, we learned that there was from these different pieces of lore, we learned that there was Jace Adon, who was some ancient lord slash king of the Adonites, and he built New Nerkayum into a fortress and had two sons, Edwin and Procor. And then Edwin murdered Procor, and Edwin murdered Procor and also murdered Jace. But before murdering Procor, murdered Jace and cooked him into a stew to feed to Procor. Now, we have it learned that Jace murdered his half-brother Procor and then claimed the city as his own, with the cooking him into a stew being a reference to, you might think Tantalus, but actually Thyestes and Atreus murdering Thyestes' sons, Atreus' nephews, and then cooking them into a stew to feed to his own brother. So this is interesting because, and then this, however, fails, and Edwin is probably killed, and then the Fragrant Groves release control of New Nerkayum, and then New Nerkayum becomes its own city, albeit clientalized. So this is an interesting story because what we have is the father and two sons disconnected by birth, that they are half siblings, either they have the same father or the same mother. And the fact that the fact that Edwin would kill Procor in order to take the throne suggests that Procor was ahead in the line of succession before Edwin. So we actually have, we will need to go back to this later, shall we say, but this is a very interesting story showing the level of cursedness inside the clan of the Adenites. So they go through the cities, in fact, cities, in fact, a hollow shell, with the destitute widow being evocative of Lucian's memories and thinking of Maria. So they are under assumed names, and then Shy Estelle, Estelle being a goddess of sleep, favors us. A goddess of sleep at night, and fairly half the city would know my face as their lord and master's son. Lord and master being a very like authoritarian title. And then Lucian, his lips twitched. He wants to say something but isn't. And he says, even outside the court, how would they know your face? It's not you on the drachms. How would they know your face? This might be that Lucian is thinking about something else, shall we say. It's not your face on the drachms, drachms being from the Greek drachma, which is a form of silver coin. And then that Edmund says, it's not my father's either, not my father's face on the drachms either, which is meaning one of two things, which is meaning either Edmund does not consider Tychon Otho his real father, even though legally speaking he is. So it's not Edmund's father, actual biological father on the coins, or it's saying that the face on the coins is not Tychon Otho's face either. That is some um airbrushed, idealized face of Tychon Otho. In fact, we know what Tychon Otho looks like thanks to Edmund too. He doesn't look very physically impressive as a person. So, um, then we have Egenhand mysteriously leave. We will get to that later. And then we have the beginning of Flotch on the Crossings, which is this nice little canal river weir city. So, and we also learned that later it had joined the Nemorian Potentate, which is some part of the empire to the north, which joined the empire through royal marriage, meaning that there are different ways of joining the empire, because of course there are. So here we see a funeral where the body is being offered, the body with a bunch of limbs, which makes us think of something in the prologue, is being offered to the water, and then the coffin sinks into the water because holes have been punched into the coffin. And this is all happening between an ebon tree, which is dark and gold, and then this stone, which we will learn a bit more about later. And then Lucian, um, Lucian is watching this earnestly. However, Edmund is being demeaning. He compares giving, he says our custom is to give the dead to the earth, which is what happens in the undercrofts, that the bones are cremated and then given to the earth, and then you pour the libations into the earth, which is different to say what they do in the mountains, where you put the dead in cairns to try and get them even higher up, which also makes us think of the Lord of Blackbirds. And then here Edmund mentions for the first time some group called the Tribes of Harat, which apparently also give their dead to the water, with the water representing this pool of souls or the afterlife. And Lucian thinks how in their custom too, the dead being put into the earth with the Dios Twilight Halls and the withered gods and praise also represents when people die, they become part of some kind of collective. However, this one is a collective of earth, whereas in the whatever small sub-religion of Flot on the Crossings is a collective of water, which of course might make you think of, say, a certain sci-fi novel from the 60s. So, but that's beside the point. Essentially, we have different ideas of how the afterlife works. However, a uniting theme is when people die in this world, their souls become collectivized and become part of this amalgamation of souls. And then in the prologue, we in fact see some form of exactly that happening, perhaps. So we have the return of the stone-faced lictorials, and their blades are coated, or at least tipped in orichalcum, their swords and their staves, with actually one of the weapons the lictorials using is sword spears, which are, you take the sword and the staff, you can combine them together. So they dine with the city's governor, a man named Raytheon Odrillis, which is one of the most fantasy names TM that I have ever come up with. And he rigs a fish. The city smells of fish. And then we again have a sort of a repeat of the events of Fortuna 2, with Edmund and Lucian drinking together, and Edmund talking about Fair Calais. Of course, Edmund talks now about Dominic Terrans, Flame Terrans he calls him because flame is a title for priest coming from the Latin flamen, meaning priest. So Edmund, as you can see, is absolutely infatuated with Dominic Terrans. Dominic Terrans, in Edmund's mind, is the ideal man. He is a warrior. He is a poet. He is gallant. He is honorable. He is eloquent. He is smart. He is everything. He's beautiful. Men and women both want to sleep with him. But he is in Edmund's mind the ideal man. And we know that when we saw Dominic Terrence that he has like he has scars on his cheek and neck from some childhood illness. But beside that, he's still considered to be undeniably beautiful and smart and everything that one would want. And then we have this fun line about no, I do say his sword plays itself work of art, his blade, the tool in which he paints his genius upon the crown's enemies. Actually, in the audio for this chapter, it was the throne's enemies. However, I changed it because the Empire Noria does not have a special throne. The special thing is the crown, which is made of the sword of the last king of the Kalaeans. The This goes back to a more ancient idea of the seat of government being wherever the king is. There is no need for a throne if the power of the state is internalized to the king itself, to the king or the emperor themselves. So, in fact, in ancient Rome, where the actual imperial the seat of imperial power, shall we say, moves with the emperor, whether they are in Rome or if they're in Ravenna or if they're in Constantinople or any other city. And that's sort of the idea we're getting at. So Lucian says such an extraordinary man doubtless draws attention to itself, but does he care himself the same grace as in same grace privately? And what Lucian is really saying is Dominic Terrans a good person? Which is what Lucian actually cares about, because Lucian's idea of justice is people being good, people doing the right thing, and people making sure others' material conditions are met. And Edmund says, no, he doesn't sleep around. Dominic Terrance as straight as they come, which, as you can see from my laughing, read into this line as you will. Might be important later. But Dominic Terrance, yeah, no, sure, straight as an arrow, and takes his oath seriously, this would be a oath of celibacy for the Holy Blades because it would get in the way of their obligations. Though I doubt there are 10,000 women, maybe half so many men, in Fair Calais willing to let him know them, with no being it's like the biblical no of to know carnally or to have carnal relations with. He has a sister, and he's like, his sister, you want to, what about her? And Lucian's like, but it's fun. It's fun. It's fun. So, anyways, Edmund goes on and says, if she, Dominic's sister, is anything like Canta is to Lucian or Iroh was to Lucian, then they get along like peacocks and feathered princesses, which is a silly little statement. It's fun. But Lucian does not take this well because Edmund is speaking like Iroh is dead. Iroh is not dead, though. And then here we have the voice in Lucian's head being much more venomous towards Edmund. Edmund says, you still think it could have been you. And here we have this repeated motif of Edmund, sort of his confidence wavering. He turns back into the little boy he used to be, and he says, I don't know. And Lucian assures himself and Edmund that he'll recover, he'll be fine. And then Edmund is drunk and says, there's something I need to tell you. The prince is dead, with a scent of wine and pork thick on his breath. Let's go back to that story of Jason, Edwin, and Procor. So, Uther, Crown Prince Uther was the one who's dead. And here we have Edmund being dead. So we have this comparison of a previous Aedenite being a previous Aedenite succession crisis, and now the Aedenite succession crisis again. But as will be alluded to later in the chapter, Lucian suggests the idea that perhaps Edmund is the one who's guilty. And in the previous, Lucian ends up later suggesting that Edmund killed Uther to better get the throne from Tygon Otho. And then the story we have Edwin killing Procor to get the throne from Jason. So it's a similar dynamic, with also them being half siblings. And then in the story, Edwin kills Procor and turns him into a stew. And then Edmund has the scent of pork on his lips, with the previous chapter Ekin 3 having a heavy association between pork and human flesh. So it's all fits very well, and it is an idea in Lucian's head that, of course, if the crown prince is dead and the one of the other princes immediately flees the city the next day, you would suspect the prince. And Lucian has this idea in his mind. He just hasn't vocalized it yet. He, in fact, has probably been thinking about this for a couple days now, but has not yet vocalized it. But that will come very soon. So, Uther is dead, and Lucian immediately puts it together. You knew Uther was dead and you lied to me. And Edmund says, I didn't lie, I just didn't tell you. And Lucian blows up at him. And then Edmund blows up back, saying, actually, this would be the third brother who's died, because we were supposed to be brothers. We were brothers to some extent. And then Iroh might be dead, and then Jason is dead, Uther is dead, that I'm also grieving. I also am scared. And here we have this interesting, and Lucian is like trying to, empathize with Edmund, but this part of him is much more skeptical, that it brings this philosophical argument in that we are not actually our past selves. We are rather strangers who replaced our past selves at some point, which is this weird argument about the continuity of the self. But essentially, this is saying, no, you aren't the person I knew. You were some other person who has his memories and took his place. Because the last time Edmund and Lucian saw each other, Edmund was what, like 11, something like that. So that's the thing Lucian's thinking about, but he now sees the emperor he might become, because now Edmund has gone from being fourth in line to the throne to being third in line to the throne, which is a big deal, especially since now it's like, oh, it's not that Edmund just fears a threat on his life, it's that people in line to the throne have been picked off now, and like suddenly this got way more real all of a sudden. And then in fact, Edmund says, I'm scared. And then Lucian, echoing Fortuna 3, says, who knows? And Edmund talks about how Lord Knox, no, not Lord Eliad or Knox, Lord Alma Knox, the head of the couriers, has been probably spreading disinformation to make sure this truth doesn't get out, because if the truth got out, the bells would ring, they would lose the agent, they would lose the element of surprise. They know, we know, they know. Where's that quote? Yes, they know, we know, they know, we know, but they don't know, they won't know you. And then why not use the electoral guard? Edmund essentially says that electoral guards have a bunch of different duties, and here we learn them. They aid military governors, so they act as mid-level bureaucrats. They act as royal envoys. They are military police and oversee the garrisons at Fair Calais, which is the capital, or the gates, which be Arson, the northern gate, Sarx, the eastern gate, and New Elon, the western gate. This one we heard about in Ekin 2, maybe, or maybe that's previous draft. And then some command the city guard, and some study under the Holy Blades, being groomed to take their swords. So here we learn about all the things electoral guards do, but their investigative duties are often pawned off to the couriers, and they serve Lord Knox, and we don't know if Lord Knox can be trusted. So it's all kind of messy. And then Lucian says, we need a few good men like Julian, Cecil, and Rupert Fair. This might be a bit ironic, but that is not nearly here nor there. And Lucian says, I catch on quickly, and now Lucian's like, okay, I'm going to lay a small rhetorical trap, which is that he gets essentially talks himself into saying, I've got all these duties and protect his image from those who besmirch it. And Edmund knows what he's talking about. And then Lucian says, don't you think people are going to suspect you because you have a lot to gain from this? And Edmund says, I didn't do it. But also, with doubts like that, some fair clay will eat you whole. With the idea of people, specifically boys, being eaten whole makes us think of the Lord of Blackbirds. But I didn't do it. And Lucian says, never said you did. But why is Edmund being so defensive? Again, who do you think it might be? And we learned about Lord Poch. Like we've already heard this information, but now Lucian knows it too. And we also learned about Lord Hrax, who desires the job of Lord of Fury, his liege, because they used to be in swap positions. It used to be that the Hrakids were the ones in charge of Old Elon, and the Furykids weren't. And that got changed when Old Elon was conquered by the Empire Noria. And then we also learned about the Knights of Marie Skedui. We get this very dramatic saying of oh yes, no, the murders clearly have money, power, influence, drive, and like, duh, of course they do. Edmund is kind of talking nothing right now, and But this idea of taking the empire itself, we don't know where this came from. Maybe this is just in Edmund's mind, but this all seems kind of suspect. And also, it seems that Edmund, even now, is not fully telling everything. And then so Edmund makes a crass joke. Lucian does not react. And then you see, that's not really the point. Lucian just has to accept that he has to deal with Edmund, who is not exactly the most amenable of people. And then we learn about the side effects with the rich man wants little, but the richer man wants much, is very telling of a statement. And we also learn about the Hygathenoi, which are another royal family, which we briefly saw in Ekin 2. And where they go, the Inquisition follow, essentially. And the Inquisition, if they knew, if they were told, they'd say they already knew. So here we learned that the Inquisition, this group, which has been hyped up in a couple chapters, lie about their level of influence and lie about their level of knowledge. So anything that involves the Inquisition, we should probably start beginning to take with a grain of salt, because Edmund is saying the Inquisition lie about their knowledge networks. But they do burn down villages and for sacrifice to Moonin, which are essentially demonic gods. So if they ever get a whiff of the idea that something's out of his foot, they'll muck everything up, and Edmund might as well get himself embalmed alive because he's a dead man. And then Lucian asks what he's going to do in Fairclay, and Edmund says later, I know what Lucian's going to do in Fairclay, but I want to give a bit of suspense because otherwise, well, it would not be terribly fun for me to say exactly what Lucian's going to do and then him to do it, and it wouldn't be terribly surprising. So, this metaphor, Estelle calling them to bed and then her embrace coming slowly, is meant to be sexual because, you invite the favor of the god and the god favors you one way or another. However, Estelle, the goddess of sleep and dreams, is the daughter of Tiamat, who is the goddess of winter and night. So it's all very tight in terms of a cosmological sort of divine realms type thing. And Lucian has this dream with the hands and the funeral. However, the man is Caithness, and Caithness is in the water and he turns around, and the hands are sticking up the water, which makes us think of something in the prologue. They have reattached Caithness' beheaded head onto his shoulders, and then essentially like so the windpipe could reattach so Caithness could speak. But such a horrific thing, such a terrible thing doesn't happen, and Lucian wakes up before it's happening, and he sees the dead man's smiles rotten, teeth the color of blood. It's all a very, very creepy dream. And then Lucian Harper wakes up and realizes that Sammy and Castor were the names of his grandparents, Samira Argent, his maternal grandmother, and Castor Marula, his paternal grandfather, so on opposite ends of the family tree. And then we have another final thing, a little gut punch at the end, which is that the bells are tolling. The talk of Uther's death has gotten out, and now things are going to get a lot more difficult. So that's all for now. And next time we're going over Iroh 4. Very fun chapter there. So anyways, I will see you all later. Bye.